Hello, friends. Welcome to this 27th webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, then Webinar Series in Progress, as shown here. And I think this is still current. I checked it today, unless it hasn't been updated. But
No, it's still current. Thank you.
good. Previous episodes of this and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald's Secret Teachings or Secret Doctrine. During our last session, we finished up a 5-part series on Atlantis through an exploration of those cultures whose mythologies suggest a connection with Atlantis, with a particular focus on the Mayan culture. On turning the page of the folio edition of Secret Teachings, we come to our next topic, the myth of the dying god. And with it, we again turn our attention to the mythologies and mystery schools of the countries either bordering or near the Mediterranean, mostly bordering. Let's start by taking a look at the illustration in the center of page 35 entitled The Great God Pan. Could we get a reader for this section, please?
Yes, I'll read this one. The Great Pan was celebrated as the author and director of the sacred dances, which he is supposed to have instituted to symbolize the circumambulations of the heavenly bodies. Pan was a composite creature, the upper part, with the exception of his horns, being human, and the lower part in the form of a goat. Pan is the prototype of natural energy and, while undoubtedly a phallic deity, should not be confused with Priapus. The pipes of Pan signify the natural harmony of the spheres, and the god himself is a symbol of Saturn because this planet is enthroned in Capricorn, whose emblem is a goat. The Egyptians were initiated into the mysteries of Pan, who was regarded as a phase of Jupiter, the demiurgus.
Yeah.
Pan represented the impregnating power of the sun and was the chief of a horde of rustic deities and satyrs. He also signified the controlling spirit of the lower worlds. The Christians fabricated a story to the effect that at the time of the birth of Christ, the oracles were silenced after giving utterance to one last cry, "Great Pan is dead."
Any thoughts or questions right off the top? Okay. First, the idea that the dances led by Pan were somehow debauched, it's kind of a popular idea, is completely inaccurate, as we learned from Richard Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology. And could we get a reader for beginning with the caption at the bottom of the page and then the text?
Yeah, Lynn, can you read that, please?
Pan, teaching his Eromenos, the shepherd of Daphnis, to play the pan flute, Roman copy of Greek original, circa 100 BC, found in Pompeii. Dancing was part of the ceremonial and all mystic rites, whence it was held in such high esteem that the philosopher Socrates and the poet Sophocles, both persons of exemplary gravity and the latter of high political rank and dignity, condescended to cultivate it as a useful and respectable accomplishment. The author of the Homeric hymn to Apollo describes that God accompanying his lyre with the dance, joined by other deities and a Corinthian poet cited by Athenaeus, introduces the father of gods and men employed in the same exercise. The ancient Hindus, too, paid their devotions to the sun by a dance imitative of his motions, which they performed every morning and evening, and which was their only act of worship. Among the Greeks, the Gnosian dances were particularly sacred to Jupiter, as the Nicaean were to Bacchus, both of which were under the direction of Pan, who, being the principle of universal order, partook of the nature of all the other gods, they being personifications of particular modes of acting of the great all-ruling principle, and he of his general law of pre-establishing harmony. Whence, upon an ancient earthen vase of Greek workmanship, he is represented playing upon a pipe between two figures, the one male and the other female, over the latter of which is written nous, and over the former alkos, whilst he himself is distinguished by the title molkos, so that this composition explicitly shows him in the character of universal harmony, resulting from mind and strength. These titles being in the ancient dialect of Magna Graecia, where the vase was found.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, I look everywhere at 2 different times for this particular pot because often you can find these things that are described. I could not find this anywhere or any mention of it other than here. Nonetheless, any thoughts or questions about this? Of note here is the definition of Pan as the principle of universal order. If you're going to hang on to one idea about him, that's a good one. An idea we'll explore further a little bit. As to imitating the motions of the sun, we have the Sufi whirling dervishes and temple dancing, which is still practiced as a spiritual discipline in southern India. And you could tell by the sculpture here, it has a long history of this dancing. Next, we have the idea that the sacred dances given by Pan to his followers symbolized the movements of the planets. And again, from symbolical language. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Pan is called in the Orphic hymns Zeus, the mover of all things, and described as harmonizing them by the music of his pipe. He is also called the pervader of the sky and of the sea, to signify the principle of order diffused through heaven and earth. And the Arcadians called him the Lord of Matter, which title is expressed in the Latin name Sylvanus. In a choral code of Sophocles, Pan is addressed by the title of author and director of the dances of the gods, as being the author and disposer of the second, I'm turning my phone down because you probably can hear my phone doing it. Okay, I turned it down. Pan is addressed by the title of author and director of the dances of the gods, as being the author and disposer of the regular motions of the universe, of which these divine dances were symbols.
Thank you, Greg. Any thoughts or questions? As the pervader of the sky and of the sea, we have another reference to Pan as the principle of universal order. Pan, as the Lord of Matter, identifies him as a creator god, a third aspect entity. Next, why does Pan take the form of a goat? Inquiring minds want to know. Could we get a reader, please?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please?
These Egyptians, who are the Mendesians, consider Pan to be one of the 8 gods who existed before the 12, and Pan is represented in Egypt by the painters and the sculptors, just as he is in Greece with the face and legs of a goat. They do not, however, believe this to be his real shape, or consider him in any respect unlike the other gods, but they represent him thus for a mystical reason, which I prefer not to relate. In Egyptian, the goat and Pan are both called Mendes, Herodotus 246.
Yes, and of course Herodotus is an ancient writer, so it's very enticing here when he says that he prefers not to relate, suggesting he actually knew the reason, but probably felt it wasn't appropriate to relate. Maybe a secret. Yeah, I see a raised hand.
Right. Go ahead, Scott. Oops.
There we go. Hello.
Hey,
Remembering that Herodotus is considered the father of history and that he was an initiate. So his tongue was tied at certain points, like this one.
indeed. So, yeah, preferring not to relate suggests that it's a secret of initiation. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that.
Could it also, since the goat climbs the mountain, be an indication of a third degree initiate? In other words, left the plains, left the valleys, and now climbing the mountain?
Yeah, good intuition there. That's it's definitely related to that. And we're going to be looking at some DK just on that subject as to what the difference between the goat and the sheep. I see, Greg.
Yeah, Greg, go ahead.
The only thing is, I don't know if this is too much of a secret, but many people would call this representation almost like a Beelzebub or Lucifer kind of a thing. But in any case, he's Lucifer in the positive aspect is the bringer of light, whereas in the negative aspect, it's the one who seeks to take over the heavens.
Right. And, Pan was not specifically Lucifer. The connection comes through the idea of him being the devil. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. So let's just hold on to that thought. There was no such prejudice against horned gods or creatures pre-Christian in the pre-Christian times. Okay, Gerald Massey takes us a little bit deeper into this idea of the goat. Could we get a reader, please?
Scott, please.
Beyond the two hands is the means of signaling numbers, the archetypes of 1, 2, and 3. Running through many groups of languages are the mother, 1, the child, twin, 2, the virile male, 3. These being the typical trinity and unity under various names. The divinity Pan or Phanes, for example, is a form of this triune total or collective all. Pan is the hairy horned one of the mystical compound nature. Hair and horn are his types of pubescence, which show the second phase of the male child. An, for hair, to be hairy or wanton, is a reduced form of Fan, Pan, or Ben, the phoenix. Phanes was the phoenix that transformed itself at the time of puberty.
Thank you. I always count on Gerald Massey to give you the inside view. So next we have Pan is the prototype of natural energy, and while undoubtedly a phallic deity, should not be confused with Priapus. Though both are associated with the third or form aspect, Pan is an archetypal creator god, whereas Priapus is specifically related to the sex act, fertility, and physical generation in the animal plant, as well as the human kingdom. Can we get a reader for this, please? A little bit about Priapus to give us some background.
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
The Greek Priapus was a god of animal and vegetable fertility. He was represented in a caricature of the human form, grotesquely misshapen, with an enormous phallus. The ass was sacrificed in his honor, probably because the ass symbolized lecherousness and was associated with the god's sexual potency. In Greek mythology, his father was Dionysus, the wine god. His mother was either a local nymph or Aphrodite, the goddess of love. In Hellenistic times, Priapus worship spread throughout the ancient world. Sophisticated urban society tended to regard him with ribald amusement, but in the country he was adopted as a god of gardens, his statue serving as a combined scarecrow and garden deity.
Guardian deity. Thank you, Karen. Any thoughts about this? Questions about Priapus? If you do a search for images on Priapus, prepare yourselves. You're going to get some wild results. This passage, the pipes of Pan signify the natural harmony of the spheres. Could we get a reader about this?
Okay, Joan, can you read that for us, please?
The sun is the flaming altar in the center of the solar system, about which the planets, with their attendant moons, circle in the rhythmic dance of the spheres. Dancing was originally a sacred art, created to express the harmonious motion of the world. In the midst of the dancers stood the great god Pan, lord of the mundane sphere, whose pipe of 7 reeds signifies the septenary division of celestial harmonics. The modern world has never been able to completely unravel the Pythagorean mystery of planetary harmony, designated by the Greeks as the music of the spheres.
Thank you. Any questions about this? He's an embodiment of that music of the spheres harmonics. It's DK calls it the Beatitudes. It's the atmic level sense of hearing where you come into awareness of the sound of the music of the spheres, which is a cosmic expression. And he's an embodiment of that harmony. That's one of his qualities anyway. This passage describes the Onyx Cameo, pictured on the left. It would actually be much, much smaller than this, probably just an inch or an inch and a half tall. Could we get a reader for this?
Yes. Trudy, can you read that for us, please?
Onyx Cameo, universal nature, symbolized in a highly poetic manner, combining all her forces for the protection of the bearer. The eagle of Jupiter, in brackets air, the dolphins of Neptune, water, the lion of Sol, fire, are molded into the mask of Pan, whose semi-bestial nature is of the earth. Earthly, Winckelmann, in describing an intaglio of Pan playing upon his syrinx, seated in the center of the zodiac, observes that the ancients considered this god as a type of the universe, and saw in his horns and shaggy hairs mystic allusions to the solar rays. For the same reason, Apollo shared his krypton with Pan, and Orpheus sings to him as attuning the harmony of the world with his sportive music.
Thank you. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Next. The god himself is a symbol of Saturn because this planet is enthroned in Capricorn, whose emblem is a goat. In ancient Babylon, the symbol for Capricorn was the sea goat, which, like the Egyptian Makara, was at home on both sea and land, a metaphor for the seen and unseen realms. In his section on Libra, which is hierarchically ruled by Saturn, DK contrasts the Aryan sheep with the Capricornian goats. Could we get a reader for this DK passage?
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Goats are those who climb freely where they choose and are self-directed in conduct and attitude. This self-direction may lead them in either direction upon the wheel of life, following either selfish desire or spiritual aspiration. But the point to have in mind is that, judicially and with intent, and after due reflection and balancing of the various ways, they then do as they will and as seems to them right and desirable. This is of itself of a basic usefulness, and thereby they learn. For all action produces results, and the judicial mind weighs cause and effect more correctly than any other. From Esoteric Astrology, page 233 to 4.
Thank you. Here's a further description of goat mentality, also from Esoteric Astrology. Let's see, where did it go? Oops. Somehow I got past this here. Okay, let's read this one. I just reversed the order. Okay, can we get a reader for this, please?
Jan, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted. Okay, let's get somebody else. Kirsten, can you read that for us, please? There we go. You're open. Your mic's open.
So, Libra is sometimes called the place of judgment, for it is here that the decision is made and the die is cast which separate the sheep from goats, or those constellations ruled by Aries, the ram or lamb, and those ruled by Capricorn, the goat. It really marks the distinction between the ordinary wheel of life and the reversed wheel.
Thank you. So, seemingly contradictory statements that, they can go, goats are self-directed, which, suggests individualized awareness, and that they go whichever way they want. But ultimately, that mentality leads to this shift off of the ordinary wheel onto the reversed wheel. Okay.
Francis?
Thoughts or questions?
Yes. Efrosini says, in Greek, the word pan resonates with the Greek word for the whole, for the universe. Yeah. There were many panis in Greek mythology. Titanophan, Doispan, I'm sorry, Efrosini, my Greek is terrible, Hermopan, etc., as if every great god had his own pan. He was a multifaceted god.
Very useful. Thank you, Efrosini. Appreciate that. Okay, next up. The Egyptians were initiated into the mysteries of Pan, who was regarded as a phase of Jupiter, the demiurgus. Now, remember, separate the idea of the planet Jupiter and the logoic aspect of Jupiter, who is the demiurgus, the 7 in 1. The aspect of the demiurgus specifically represented by Pan is that of physical plane creation, for Pan represents the third or form aspect, the quote, impregnating power of the sun. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Janet, can you read that for us, please?
Diodorus Siculus says that it was the belief of the ancients that Osiris, Serapis, Dionysos, Pluto, Jupiter, and Pan were all one. Alsanis represents all the deities to be included under the term Dionysos. Sometimes Pan was called the god of all, sometimes Jupiter. Nanus states that all the different gods, whatever might be their names, Hercules, Ammon, Apollo, or Mitra, centered in the sun.
Thank you. But how, we may ask, can Pan, who is worshipped in Arcadia as the god of the natural world, also be the solar all god? All being the actual meaning of the term Pan, like Pan-Asiatic or Pan-Atlantic or whatever, meaning covering the whole, right? Thomas Taylor, quoting Proclus, gives us an important key to help us understand this question. It's one of the most important quotes from the esoteric literature that I've come across. It's really revealing, revelatory. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, I'll read this. They celebrate Jupiter, Osiris, the solar Pan, and others of which the books of theologists and theurgists are full, from all which it is evident that each of the planets is truly said to be the leader of many gods who give completion to this peculiar circulation. Thus, we may perceive at one view why the sun in the Orphic hymns is called Jupiter, why Apollo is called Pan, and Bacchus the sun, why the moon seems to be the same with Rhea, Ceres, Proserpine, Juno, Venus, etc., and, in short, why any one divinity is celebrated with the names and epithets of so many of the rest. For from this sublime theory, it follows that every sphere contains a Jupiter, Neptune, Vulcan, Vesta, Minerva, Mars, Ceres, Juno, Diana, Mercury, Venus, Apollo, and in short, every deity, each sphere at the same time conferring on these gods the peculiar characteristic of its nature, so that, for instance, in the sun they all possess a solar property, in the moon a lunar one, and so of the rest. From this theory, too, we may perceive the truth of that divine saying of the ancients that all things are full of gods, for more particular orders proceed from such as are more general, the mundane from the supermundane, and the sublunary from the celestial, while earth becomes the general receptacle of the illuminations of all the gods.
And the quote continues. Could we get a reader, please?
Lynn, please.
Hence, as Proclus shortly after observes, there is a terrestrial Ceres, Vesta, and Isis, as likewise a terrestrial Jupiter and a terrestrial Hermes, established about the one divinity of the earth, just as a multitude of celestial gods proceeds about the one divinity of the heavens. For there are progressions of all the celestial gods into the earth, and earth contains all things in an earthly manner, which heaven comprehends celestially. Hence we speak of a terrestrial Bacchus and a terrestrial Apollo, who bestows the all various streams of water with which the earth abounds, and openings profound prophetic of futurity. And if to all this we only add that all the other mundane gods subsist in the 12 above mentioned, and in short, all the mundane and the supermundane gods, And that the first triad of these is demiurgic or fabricative, viz. Jupiter, Neptune, Vulcan. The second, Vista, Minerva, Mars, defensive. The third series, Juno, Diana, vivific. And the fourth, Mercury, Venus, Apollo, elevating with and harmonic. I say, if we unite with this, with the preceding theory, there is nothing in the ancient theology that will not appear admirably sublime and beautifully connected, accurate in all its parts, scientific and divine.
Thank you, Lynn. The important takeaway here is that every planet has within itself, and thus as part of its expression, each of the gods, thereby giving us, for example, both solar and lunar aspects of Juno, Diana, Apollo, etc., while at the same time each god holds within itself the qualities of each of the planets. And you have to remember here that the planets were named after gods, and so you have to distinguish between, the quality of Jupiter, the planet, and Jupiter, the Roman Zeus, okay, because there is a difference. And that's true of all of these, even though they're usually related in some ways, but nonetheless. Yes. Yeah.
Scott, go ahead.
What seems to be obvious here, glaringly omitted, is Saturn. It's in none of these lists that you just gave, which suggest, as well as Uranus is not there, his father, Neptune is, no Pluto, but Vulcan is. So it seems like it's all within the world still of Saturn, which is that synthesizing god of the third ray, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because you can read this list and think that it's just the ones that he came up with offhand. It's like it's a partial list, and he knows that, and he's leaving you to fill in the others, both planets and gods. Or it could have, as you're suggesting, a very specific agenda behind listing just these gods. But you can't not have Saturn in this list if Pan is also a part of this list, right?
It would seem, but there's that synthesizing aspect of Saturn and of the cosmic physical plane that may include Pan, and that's the link also with the mysterious symbol for Capricorn.
Indeed. Yeah, as Saturn is the physical permanent atom of the solar system, well, greater than that, of the specifically of the cosmic physical plane, not just which extends beyond the solar system. I mean, the higher planes extend beyond the solar system, so it's indicated that he's of a very particular nature, in that. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. Let's see, we have some other hands.
Yes, we do. And I just wanted to make a comment. When I read this and the way it's presented here, it reminds me of the planetary schemes. They each have the other spheres in parts of their schemes. So they're interrelated in that way, kind of like he's describing here.
Very good point. Yes, indeed. We have, we have the Venus scheme. I mean, the Venus chain, as well as the Venus globe of the Earth, scheme. You have to get your terms really right. You have a Venus globe and Venus chain within the Earth scheme, which is scheme is the entire thing. And we don't know about that being true on other planets, but by extension, you can imagine that is so, in fact. Very good point. Yeah, anyone else? I think it's something. Any other hands?
Yes, go ahead, Greg.
What's really interesting is, I don't know if Manly P. Hall meant to do this or not, but if you look at the actual graphic interpretation there are actually 7 variations, and that I might jump and through law of analogy and say that this is representative of not only the 7 planets, but also the 7 Johans, the 7 rays. It's got a septenary quality that it's kind of subtle. Maybe Manly meant to do that, or just the illustration itself. But every one of us, human being or planetary logos, or every one of us in our highest expression, has to work through all 7 of the facets of the universal logos, or in a sense our solar logos, but we have to work through those as individuals for our own evolutionary process and growth.
Right. You're talking about subjective energies and the great field of subjective energies, and that tends to be represented in a septenary way. And exoterically, it was very useful for these subjective energies to have names and gods, which had characteristics. But on an esoteric level, they represented very specific esoteric energies. Let's see here now. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. We got more hands, so we're gonna
Yes, we do. We do. Okay, Joan.
So my thought was similar to the last 2 in that it's sort of at other levels, for example, within the rays, we're actually all under ray 2, and we have all 7 all 7 rays are within it. So it's sort of this as above, so below, but on various levels. I'm not expressing it too well. It gets split out into the others at different levels. I think like too within the chakras, like the ajna also has multiple aspects of other chakras within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That as above, so below is basically where I'm headed.
Exactly. And we also have in the planets, DK teaches us that, each planet has a triple ray array of energies that are monadic, soul, and personality. The rays he tends to give for the planets are the soul rays of those planets. And you have subrays, and you're going to have rays that are expressed by all of these gods based on an esoteric understanding. Now, some of them are quite obvious, like Martian energy, Venusian energy, but just who Venus was, as he describes earlier here, the moon seems to be identical with Rhea, Ceres, Proserpine, Juno, Venus, etc. So you have the Venusian, or Venus as the goddess, and you have Venus as the planet. So you really have to be clear in your understanding here. But ultimately, it is an interrelation and an interweaving of these subtle energies, which, you could say ultimately are determined by rays and subrays. Remember, Thomas Taylor called this an admirably sublime and beautifully connected, accurate in all its parts, scientific and divine. And he's talking about this system, right? Here's a chart that I worked up that illustrates Proclus's concept. The far left column illustrates the gods cited by Thomas Taylor. Now, obviously, you could there are many more gods could be included, and you could tweak this list based on what you are focusing on, what your orientation is. The upper row lists the planets in the order of ascension recognized by the ancients, as shown in that illustration up on the upper right corner. And here it is. The fact that the 7 planets, called the 7 gates in ancient times, culminates with Saturn, affirms Pan's supremacy. Thus, his title as All God, or Pan, probably relates to the Saturnian Pan, using Proclus's system, rather than what we might imagine, which is the more theosophical solar Pan, which is the what we tend to think of as the synthesizing entity. The colors in this chart were determined by the ray colors of the planets, but to make the chart complete, every square would have a unique color representing the particular energy of the combination of planet and God. Of course, the nuanced esoteric understanding of the Greek gods and planets by those ancient disciples actually initiated in the Greek mysteries is long gone. But something of these energies might be regained if these combinations were meditated upon. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Well, Carrie's got his hand up from last time, so
Let's start there.
Carrie. Oops.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
If you go back to the previous slide.
This one?
No, the one before that. The one before that. Yeah, this one. Maybe it's just rather a mundane idea, but these, who is the artist? First question.
Oh, I don't know. You mean if this is just
yes, it's not in Manly P. Hall, is it?
Oh, no.
No.
It's just an illustration of Greek gods. I didn't even try to.
But if you go through them, you see that they seem to be a representation of the rays in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're actually showing the characteristics of what we associate with those rays.
Hey,
I was curious about it. That was all. Somebody knew.
Excellent. I never even looked that close because I didn't give that much credence to the source. I thought it was just an illustration of the gods. However, I can see your point. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Definitely see. Yes, Scott.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just an observation.
I was thinking about this idea of Pan meaning all, originally meaning all, and the confusion that arises with the word pantheism, which so we think of that as being multi-gods, and yet Pan originally was singular, insofar it was all. So there's the flip side of this pantheism, which is everything, but it's also like the Egyptian gods, for instance, are considered to be pantheistic, but at the core, at the highest level, they knew it was just one. It was all. And that was the original Pan. And then it broke into everything.
Yeah, well, it comes to that fundamental quality of the demiurgus, whoever that might be, which is that it's 7 in 1. You have the one who, when upon manifestation, breaks into 7 qualities, which, for instance, in this solar system is the sun, who then its 7 chakras are individualized into 7 planets. And, I would think parallel to that, you would have the all Pan representing a unified field of Godhead, unmanifest, but then when manifest, it breaks out into all the gods. But then you have this kind of opposite idea, which is Pan is never described as a first aspect kind of God. It's always the the radiance of the sun, the well, I think MPH calls it the impregnating power of the sun. It's very third aspect. It's nature, and that nature can be solar systemic, or it can be planetary. But it's manifested nature.
Right,
So
which makes it that third ray aspect of Saturn again, from as Pan, as an all, not from the first ray, but from the third point. All manifests from the third, as it does. It goes 1, 2, 3, all, or 1, 2, and all.
Exactly. That's why I used. Let's see. Where's my charts? Where'd I go? Here. I used this rather than the solar pan, because you have to remember this is the non-sacred planet sun. This isn't the logos in its three forms, starting with the central spiritual sun represented here. This is on the chart. Where is it? Here. The sun appears fourth, right? So it's not that all-embracing being that we as theosophists tend to think of it, right? In fact, the ancients believed after death, and I'll be getting into this, that you rise up through these levels, and that the final level is Saturn. That goes along with this timekeeper idea, that when you go beyond the realm of Saturn, you go beyond time and space as a three-dimensional reality. So, yeah.
And of course, the sun is listed fourth because this is a geocentric medieval depiction.
Oh, of course. And notice that Mercury and Venus are reversed. And that had to do with, exoterically anyway, had to do with the idea of the morning and evening star, that they thought it was two planets and that one of them was Mercury, when in fact they were both, of course, as we know now, they were both Venus, but they saw it as separate entities, and something in that. But, that to me smacks of an exoteric understanding. But otherwise, they're listed in order. So, in terms of proximity from Earth, even though, it's according to proximity from Earth. Okay, where are we?
Yeah, I think that's where we were at that table.
Yeah, good. Or at this table here. Right, okay. So, I'll just repeat what I said, that the idea here, I think, is brilliant, which is that the combining of these two qualities, and you could make an argument about what belongs on this left column here, and what belongs up. Well, you can't really make an argument about what belongs on top. That is very specifically represented by this chart, and this was what the Greeks recognized as the planetary bodies, right? But you very much could change what appears here on the left column. Remember, Vulcan was Hephaestus. He was the forger. Neptune was the sea god, not Neptune the planet, which was unknown then, at least esoterically unknown, right? So you have to, don't confuse planet and Greek god orientation here, even though sometimes they're deeply connected, right? Okay.
We have a comment from Efrosini. Let me get it up here. She says, even the word pantheism has as its first synthetic the name of Pan, which means everything. Maybe it is a symbol of the creative power of nature and the third logos.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's a third logoic breakout of the natural form related. You could call it, it's what DK calls is the activity of form, right? It's form activity. And the bringing into form that activity, right? All right. Next, Pan represented the impregnating power of the sun and was the chief of a horde of rustic deities and satyrs. He also signified the controlling spirit of the lower worlds. The quote-unquote rustic deities and satyrs represents specific aspects of Pan's generative potency. Using this chart, we might identify this aspect as the earthly Pan. It's where he was and still is celebrated as terrestrial nature itself, right? You're starting to get a sense of how you can use this, right? Whereas, for instance, the solar Pan would represent the same natural manifestation on a systemic level, at least, from a theosophical point of view. I see a hand.
Yes, Greg, go ahead.
I was just thinking that maybe it's much more of a modern version, but in terms of like Peter Pan, which is like the Puella or Pueris
Where Eternus.
Eternum. It's not on there. It's just that we see Pan as something, but then we look at the modern imagery and the modern mythology of the Peter Pan, which is more like the Puella Eternus.
Yeah, it's interesting, the connection there. I would say that has a lot to do with that quality of vitality, and also the earth sprite sense about Peter Pan, who's in a sense taken over by this sprightly quality that is very much Pan-like, in the mythic sense.
Peter Pan was the boy who could never grow up, so he was always a youth.
Yeah, and that youthful vitality is very much associated with the Pan festivals. For instance, the dancing that we covered already, that we looked at, that it's full of vitality and youthful exuberance, right? Okay. Let's see, where was I here? I was going to finish this. So backing up, using the chart, we might identify the aspect as the earthly Pan, where he was and still is celebrated as terrestrial nature itself, which, of course, the early Christians, with their heaven is good, nature is bad orientation, abhorred. Also, the church associated the double-horned Pan with Satan, and that gets back to, I think Greg had an earlier comment about that. Any thoughts or questions about this, about MPH's commentary here on Pan? Okay, let's take a look at the chart that appears within the illustration. Illustration on the left, and I've blown up the chart there on the right. First, A, quote, a ruddy face, the power of heat in the world. This is the inherent heat or light of substance itself, also represented by Persephone, who specifically personified the heat within crop seed. But all that is also an aspect of Pan. B is interesting. Quote, the power of the heavenly rays upon the sublunary nature, suggesting, to me at least, the link between higher and lower. a means of aligning with and attuning to the higher realms. Very Capricornian in that sense. The ancient Egyptians believed that the two horns of the bull, which DK tells us is closely related to the two horns of the goat, was a sign of divinity and royalty. Same thing, really. A belief also held among the Norse. Of course, this is the sublunary potency, the two horns representing the duality of the natural world. DK also tells us that the higher spiritual form of this symbol is the unicorn's single horn, also a Capricornian symbol. Next, C. Quote, masculine elements refers to Pan's beard. D, quote, the power of the periodic return of the year and all of its revolutions is symbolized by the crook of the shepherd's staff called a pedium, a symbol of divine authority. The half circle formed by the top of this staff relates it to the sickle carried by Saturn, who is generally recognized as the ruler of cycles. Pan was an Egyptian as well as a Greek god, and like him, the pharaohs and Osiris were depicted with a shepherd's crook as well as with the flail. Next, E, quote, everything is maintained by its virility, possibly here indicating the phallic lower part of the shaft. As mentioned before, Pan represents the virile aspect of generation. If you have other ideas about the visual symbol compared to what's being described, please share with us. Next, F, quote, the power of the firmament or the sphere of the fixed stars. I could find no F in this illustration. However, normally the firmament appears just outside the ring of Saturn as shown in a more complete illustration of the same concept. It's actually the one we were looking at before. This references the solar pan as all God. Next, G, quote, earth, the feminine element, bristling with plants, seeds, and trees, along with I, fields, crops, etc., both represent the fruits of A, the power of heat in the material world. The thighs were often given as a blind for the genitals. Next, H, quote, aquae elicoris fons elementum femininum virgiatoni fecundum terram means something like the source of water and irrigation which creates a verdant land. Interestingly, this is the location of the hara, the source of qi or vital energy in both Chinese and Japanese tradition. So you can see that if this is seen as a terrestrial, as a source of terrestrial natural energy, that it would have very much a relationship to this qi place. Next, K, quote, the harmonies of the 7 planets, whose individual tones are represented by the 7 reeds of Pan's flute or pipe. Finally, we have L, quote, the mountains show rough and uneven places. M, the power of fecundity, indicating Pan's cloven hooves. N, the firm foundation, suggesting the earthly Pan personifies the foundation of earth itself. And finally, O, the force of the winds and their speed when agitated. All aspects of the natural world, ruled by the earthly Pan, but always with a higher correspondent in the solar or Saturnian Pan, the all God. Any thoughts or questions about anything in this chart?
Yes, Scott said F is above and left of H. And then he says, does that equal the liver?
No, F is above. Let me find H. F is above and to the... Oh, yeah, look at that. Hey, thanks. I looked all over for that. I couldn't find it. Well, God knows. The power in the firmament. Well, is that a starry cape that he's wearing there? Maybe. Or the sphere of the fixed stars. Is that what he's wearing there? It looks to me like it is. But it's, it's a skin of an animal. You could see the little face there. But those are definitely stars. So it suggests to me, capes or sashes like that represents mastery over what's represented by the sash. So, yeah, I would say that's...
Scott says the Milky Way.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, so the power in the firmament or the sphere of the fixed stars. Now, you're really getting out there in terms of extending the potency of Pan. But again, I think you can take it at any level. There could be a cosmic Pan if you look at it as this quality of the third aspect, which is the activity of the form world, right? Nature at whatever level. Thanks for... I'm almost tempted to correct it right here and now, but I'm not going to.
I have a question for you.
Uh-huh.
Hey, the harmonies of the 7 planets, someone musical. Can you tell the notes from the pan, from the flute there, that he's connected to each of the planets? I mean, I know we have representations for some of the notes that Michael uses from some things DK has said, but I wondered if that correlated to that.
Yeah, here's the close-up of that. So, we'd look at the symbols here. First of all, you have to determine whether this chart is really that esoteric. In other words, does this circle represent, in other words, this is the smallest pipe, so it's going to be the highest pitched. It does not, however, give us the note, right? But we get a sense that the pitches get lower because the reeds get larger as we go out, right? Suggesting that the lower pitches are connected, the lowest pitch is connected with Saturn. However, then, we don't have the notes. But even that piece of information is useful, and I actually hadn't thought of that. That the higher pitched means greater vibration and therefore, in a sense, more physical, more, that is more representative of activity, right? Of the activity aspect. From another point of view, you could see higher pitches as, and as a way of ascending, but that's not what is being shown here. Yeah, and other than that, I don't know that you could do. Now, isn't the second ray, is it A or G? I always forget that Michael is always telling us and tuning his pipe to.
G.
G, yeah. So there you have, a clue. You could look for the second ray planet, which would be Jupiter, and you could say this is that this is a G, and therefore what? Do you then go up the scale, from G to A here, and then back to B, C, D, E, F, G? Well, maybe, but also maybe
But
not.
it's the other way, isn't it? They're going from high to low, from left to right. It's the highest is on the left, as you said already. So
Right.
that theory doesn't work.
What you do, G?
I think the artist didn't really think too much about
Oh,
it.
you're right,
actually.
right. You're right. But thanks for saying that, because then you would have to go the other direction, because if you're going, no, wait a minute, if you go, yeah, it gets tricky. If this is an A, then this would have to be
A B.
a B, indeed, a C, a D, an E, an F, and a G. You're right. This G being in the lower octave. And then, but the big question behind all this is, did this artist have any of this in mind?
I don't think so.
No, because first of all, depicting this pipe in ascending order allows you to plug it into these rings more effectively. I'm just talking about visually, right? So I would say it's unlikely, but possible, that there's a correlation between any real information and this visual of this pipe. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about
Yeah,
this?
Scott's got his hand up, but before Scott, Joan says, or are we seeing artistic foreshortening?
Well, it's not really, this part of it is not really 3D. I mean, the figure itself is, but I would say probably not. But I tend to go with what Carrie said. I doubt the artist really had this in mind. But it's useful just to know that there are specific notes, and also these notes are going to be, the music of the spheres has a lot more. There's a connotation to the music of the spheres that's much greater than just a note in the scale, right? And it's just a great mystery that we don't have much information on. Collectively, DK calls them the Beatitudes, right? Which is that final sense of sound on the atmic plane. But of course, it goes way beyond the atmic when you're looking at the tonal expression of these planetary spheres. But that's probably all we can do with it. Yeah, anybody else?
Yeah, Lynn has a comment, but first, go ahead, Scott.
Two things to remember about this is, one, this is a well-known drawing. It may have been by Kircher from 18th century or so. That one.
I'm trying to find it, the original one. Oh, hang on. I'll get out and find it.
Yeah, that one. That was very well known. I don't remember where it's from, but the thing to note about it is that it is totally exoteric.
Peter Epien's Cosmographia, and for 1539.
Back further. To remember, it's totally exoteric. It's geocentric. It has the Earth in the center.
Yeah.
So there's nothing esoteric about this thing. This is a totally exoteric presentation.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is that when we think of the planets, when you compare them, their order physically as we see them to the rays or to the colors that are associated with them, they're not in order. They're just not. Yeah. To assume that they are is again a really exoteric way of looking at things. It's just they don't go from right 1, 2, 3, 4 and count out.
Yeah, right. It's not at all.
So you can't be looking at this pitch pipe up here, which is
right.
The depiction is being accurate because the planets to begin with aren't in the right place.
No, the only thing you can say about the order of the planets as here shown is that except for the reversal of Venus and Mercury, they represent proximity from the Earth. And that in itself is a very exoteric orientation, Yeah, well, of course, what would you expect? This was closely guarded information back in the day, So this is what we have.
There's only one more thing to say about this painting, this drawing, is that the end of the pipe has a little squiggle on it,
Yeah, what is
which actually attaches to the line, not to the space. So it's actually what is between the planets. It's
Yeah.
referring to what's between.
Indeed. And again, I think because it's such an exoteric representation that we can't, I agree that it's the circle. And I think the moon, well, wait a minute now. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So there's actually 8 circles. So you have to go to the, this is the Earth orbit. The lunar would be here. Everybody see my cursor? And then you would go out from that. It would be the circle above the emblem, not the space between. Because these are talking about orbits. And so the orbits are going to be represented by circles, not by the spaces in between. It's just that that's where the artist put them. And I just determined that because of the fact that there's 8 circles and there's only 7 planets, and that Saturn is below the last one, which it represents, right? Okay, good enough.
And one last thing, Lynn gave us the notes from Michael, and that's
Oh, good. Go ahead.
C
That's all.
Mars, D
Uh-huh.
Vulcan and the Sun, E Mercury, F Saturn, G Jupiter, A Venus, B the Moon veiling Uranus.
Okay, that's great. And I would love. Why don't you put that in the chat box?
I did. I sent
you
that to
did?
everyone.
You're way ahead. Okay, that's terrific. Because it's, I think that's first of all, it's way more esoteric information because it's extracted from all of DK's writings than anything we're getting here. Okay, so even trying to correlate what you just gave us and this, I think, is a futile exercise.
Okay. And then we have a question from Brian. He says, is it possible he is emphasizing Persephone and Capricorn rising up from around the 4th house is implicated on page 79?
I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, let me unmute Brian. Okay, can you explain, please? I've asked you. There you go. Can you talk? We can't hear you yet, Brian. I can see that your mic's open, but we can't hear you.
Okay, that's too bad. Yeah, I'm not sure what you meant by that. If somebody else understood the implications of what Brian was saying, then please share with us. But I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I guess he's having trouble talking. He says, go on for now.
Okay, sorry. I really like to engage with everyone and to bring at least some discussion about your questions. But sometimes I'm just clueless. So without
and then we have a couple of other comments here. I'm just repasting that in the chat. Okay, hold on. Let me see. Ephrosyne says in Greek mythology, Syrinx was a forest nymph. In her attempt to escape the affection of the god Pan, she was transformed into a water reed, or calamos, a cane reed. Then Pan cut several reeds, placed them in parallel, one next to the other, and bound them together to make a melodic instrument, musical instrument. Ancient Greeks called this instrument syrinx. It can be related to the 7 rays and the 7 notes that correspond to the rays.
Thank you for that, Ephrosyne. Yeah, well, there's probably some fascinating hidden information if you were to look into the myth of Pan and Syrinx as to the nature of the pan flute and its connection, with the planets. But so much of the Greek I would say all of the Greek mythology is exoteric. It was the outer story, and that if you went to the mystery schools, Eleusinian or wherever, you would be privy to the interpretations that were at that time very esoteric. And even then, there would be levels based on who you were. There was the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. Each would be there would be veils that would be, and that's still true, right? But so much more, is given now than was given then. All right.
And then we have one more comment. Janet says, I would just add that G is given to Earth in crystal bowls.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Earth is, a first, second, third ray personality, second ray soul, first ray monad. At least that's how Michael has determined it. So, you can't, it's the G as the second ray would be the soul ray of the earth. And so that works, right? Okay. It's time to move into the text of our new section, which is the myth of the dying God, which might more accurately be called the myth of the resurrected God, since it is resurrection, not death, that represents the true nature of Godhead. This longish section should actually have been part of the 3 chapters entitled The Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, since it is a survey of those Mediterranean mystery schools not yet covered in those earlier chapters, right? Not covered in those earlier chapters. In fact, in my opinion, the chapter on Atlantis should have preceded all these sections on the European mystery schools and Mediterranean mystery schools, since Atlantis was almost certainly the source of their origin, and then, they could have been presented. But, that's how MPH chose to do it. But just realize that we're now going full tilt back into these Mediterranean mysteries. So could we get a reader to start us off?
Carrie, can you read that, please?
The myth of the dying god. The myth of Tammuz and Ishtar is one of the earliest examples of the dying god allegory, probably antedating 4000 BC. See Babylonia and Assyria by Lewis Spence. The imperfect condition of the tablets upon which the legends are inscribed makes it impossible to secure more than a fragmentary account of the Tammuz rites. Being the esoteric god of the sun, Tammuz did not occupy a position among the first deities venerated by the Babylonians, who, for lack of deeper knowledge, looked upon him as a god of agriculture or a vegetation spirit. Originally, he was described as being one of the guardians of the gates of the underworld. Like many other savior gods, he is referred to as a shepherd, or the lord of the shepherd's seat. Tammuz occupies the remarkable position of a son and husband of Ishtar, the Babylonian and Assyrian mother goddess. Ishtar, to whom the planet Venus was sacred, was the most widely venerated deity of the Babylonian and Assyrian pantheon.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, first up, the myth of Tammuz and Ishtar is one of the earliest examples of the dying god allegory, probably antedating 4000 BC. And as one of the earliest historical examples, it would serve as a template. It would come to serve as a template for many of the 8 mystery schools we've thus far studied, most particularly Persephone's sojourn in and resurrection from Hades. But even those mysteries that were not directly inspired by the myth of Tammuz and Ishtar, such as the North Udin, who led the gods of a preordained defeat against the Jotuns, or Bacchus, who was torn limb from limb by the Titans, held the promise of resurrection for God and man alike. In fact, the basic themes found in the myth of Tammuz and Ishtar, coeval with Egyptian and Hindu teachings, were likely carried over from Atlantis, and they still animate current religious beliefs to this day. Here's the book that MPH references, entitled Myths and Legends of Babylonia and Assyria, which we'll use to introduce Tammuz and Ishtar more thoroughly. Could we get a reader, please? Starting with Tammuz.
Scott, please.
Tammuz and Ishtar. The myth of Tammuz is one of high antiquity, dating possibly from 4000 BC or even earlier. Both Tammuz and Ishtar were originally non-Semitic, the name of the former deity being derived from the Akkadian Dumuzi, son of life, or the only son, perhaps a contraction of Dumuzi Apsu, offspring of the spirit of the deep. Spirit of the deep is the water god Ea, and Tammuz apparently typifies the sun, though he is not a simple solar deity, but a god who unites in himself the attributes of various divinities. An ancient Akkadian hymn addresses Tammuz as shepherd and lord, husband of Ishtar, the lady of heaven, lord of the underworld, lord of the shepherd's seat. Tammuz is the shepherd of the sky, and his flocks and herds, like those of Saint Ilya of Slavonic folklore, are the cloud cattle and the fleecy vapors of the heavens.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions? Here's a cylinder seal impression, which probably represents Tammuz in the underworld. Note the 2 serpents that flank him. Next, being the esoteric god of the sun, Tammuz did not occupy a position among the first deities venerated by the Babylonians, who, for lack of deeper understanding, looked upon him as a god of agriculture or a vegetation spirit. The, quote, esoteric god of the sun is a primordial systemic logos, the one before diversifying into the 7. Oya Ohu the younger, systemically speaking, from the stanzas of Zion, known among the ancients as the primordial son of the mother deep. And in this understanding, we have a parallel to theosophical thought. Tammuz, as the spirit of vegetation, is a completely exoteric perspective. Nonetheless, a small part of the creative aspect of the agricultural god is in this highest or higher representation of this solar god. Any thoughts about this? Next, Tammuz occupies a remarkable position of son and husband of Ishtar, the Babylonian and Assyrian mother goddess. Actually, among the ancients, God being son and husband was not at all remarkable, or not seen as being remarkable, as we discover in this quote from the Natural Genesis. Can we get a reader, please?
Joan, can you read that for us, please?
Oh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in the earliest human likeness, the Godhead comprised the mother, child, and virile male. This was the first trinity in unity. The dyad of mother and child is well known in Sut Typhon or Keb and Quebec, the mother of time, with Quebec or Sevek as her son, her Saturn, the earliest form of time in person. Hathor and Horus, Ishtar and Tammuz, Belit and Adar, Astarte and Sutet, Ked and Adon, and many more. But the triadic nature of the mother and her child has been overlooked. Yet, in each case, the child is also the mother's consort, called the husband of his mother, and thus the triple character of the two sexes is demonstrated. The Trinity was continued in the Gnostic system as Achamoth, the mother and her son, in his two characters. In one of these, he is the demiurge, or creator of material on the left hand, he who represented in the child image as Ptah in Egypt. On the other, he is the creator of substance, or the virile force, on the right hand. As son of the mother, without the fatherhood, he is styled Apator and Metropator. He also created 7 heavens, over which he dwells as Hebdomus, the sevenfold one, who with the mother constitutes the primary Agdoad. In him, the Trinity was united under the title of Iao. This deity, therefore, is identical with the Iao Sabaoth, the triad of two sexes and threefold character, the divinity of the 7 spirits, 7 rays, 7 planets, whose totality of trinity and heptad was tenfold in accordance with the 10 Sephiroth.
Thank you. Okay, key here is the phrase, yet in each case the child is also the mother's consort, called husband of his mother, and thus the triple character of the two sexes is demonstrated. In order to understand this belief, we have to get past the idea of physical relationships altogether. The Great Mother, who was called Ea in ancient Syria, has been described as a shining sea of light, source of primordial undifferentiated form, called in Theosophy Mula Prakriti. The Son, fatherless because self-born, draws his form from that great sea. When he further differentiates into the 7 in 1, he then becomes his mother's consort, because the creation which he instigates also draws its form from Mula Prakriti, the Great Mother. Thus it is his creative intent itself, expressing his will to be, that is his quote-unquote virility. This is an important point. I hope you get some sense of this.
Francis?
Yeah.
Efrosini says, perhaps a symbolism of the form, mother, that gives birth to the soul, the son, that in turn fertilizes it and merges with his mother.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yes. Interesting. Yeah, that also accounts for the Trinity in that dual relationship, right? Any discussion about this? Any thoughts or ideas about this enigmatic concept? Okay. Next, Ishtar, to whom the planet Venus was sacred, was, wait a minute, is that right? Yeah. was the most widely venerated deity of the Babylonian and Assyrian pantheon. So we'll continue with Spence's introduction. Could we get a reader, please?
Greg,
This is
can you
on
read?
Ishtar.
Can you read that, please?
Ishtar has from an early period been associated with Tammuz as his consort, as she has indeed with Merodach and Asur and other deities. Yet she is by no means a mere reflection of the male divinity, but has a distinct individuality of her own, differing in this from all other Babylonian goddesses. The widespread character of the worship of Ishtar is remarkable. None of the Babylonian or Assyrian deities were adopted into the pantheons of so many alien races. From the Persian Gulf to the Pillars of Hercules, she was adored as the great mother of all that lived. She has been identified with Dakina, wife of Ea, and is therefore mother of Tammuz, as well as his consort. This dual relationship may account for that which appears in later myths among the Greeks, where Smyrna, mother of Adonis, is also his sister. Ishtar was regarded sometimes as the daughter of the sky god Anu, and sometimes as the child of Sin, or Sin, the lunar deity. Her worship in Babylonia was universal, and in time displaced that of Tammuz himself. The love of Ishtar for Tammuz represents the wooing of the sun god of springtime by the goddess of fertility, from myths and legends of Babylonia and Assyria.
Thank you. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let's finish the paragraph. This longish paragraph here. Could we get a reader, please?
Janet, can you read that for us, please?
She was probably identical with Astarte, and Aphrodite. The story of her descent into the underworld in search, presumably for the sacred elixir, which alone could restore Tammuz to life, is the key to the ritual of her mysteries. Tammuz, whose annual festival took place just before the summer solstice, died in mid-summer in the ancient month which bore his name, and was mourned with elaborate ceremonies. The manner of his death is unknown, but some of the accusations made against Ishtar by Nimrod would indicate that she indirectly, at least, had contributed to his demise. And I'd like to know why. The resurrection of Tammuz was the occasion of great rejoicing, at which time he was hailed as a redeemer of his people.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, first up, she was probably identical with Ashtaroth, Astarte, and Aphrodite. Here's some sculptures that indicate the similarities of these goddesses. But there are differences, at least in emphasis, and so often it is emphasis. For example, the only image that can definitely be identified as Astarte depict her as a huntress in a chariot, whereas Aphrodite was primarily known as the goddess of love. Next, the story of her descent into the underworld in search, presumably for the sacred elixir which alone could restore Tammuz to life, is the key to the ritual of her mysteries. This is the prototype for both the Eleusinian and the Bacchic mysteries, as indicated here by Joseph Campbell. Could we get a reader for this short one?
Yes. Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
Fraser, author of The Golden Bough, has shown that the myths of the dead and resurrected god Osiris so closely resemble those of Tammuz, Adonis, and Dionysos as to be practically the same, and that all were related in the period of their prehistoric development to the rites of the killed and resurrected divine king.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts about this? You know, if you relate this to the idea of what was brought forth by Thomas Taylor and Proclus, which is that there are shades of these gods in terms of their subjective emphasis or potencies. You know, theosophically, we could call them subrays. You can see how these myths would be referring to the same great being and the same great archetype, but with subtle different shadings based on what region they were influencing and what aspect was being particularly focused on, right? Though with many variations in detail, all these versions of the, quote, dead and resurrected God, esoterically understood, tell the story of the perennial avatar's journey through the seven gates into the infernal regions, the three worlds of human endeavor, in order to teach humanity about the path of return, and usually give his life in the process. This is the sacred elixir which alone could restore Tammuz. These teachings, the secret doctrine, as well as all other incarnating souls, to life. The metaphor of a sacred elixir is an ancient concept that shows up in cultures around the world. Before I get those, let's answer the hand.
Greg, go ahead.
I was thinking about the Christian mythology around, or whether it's true or not, around the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and how whether that would be considered primarily symbolical, or is it some other kind of resurrection expression or explanation? Because we talk here about the resurrection as the return to the physical in a way that might even reference to the idea of reincarnation and karma, et cetera, et cetera.
Actually, I think it points in the other direction. Your resurrection is not so much return to the physical, it's return to the source of the physical, to the soul, and to the monadic source, theosophically speaking. So the resurrection of Jesus Christ wouldn't be referring to his future incarnations, which Theosophy tells us he did indeed have, but to his return to his own soul and monadic source. You know, what he called the Father in heaven, and since he was a fourth initiate, well, Jesus the Christ is the sixth initiate, then he would be very much aware of the Lord of the world, Sanat Kumara. And so that would be the true resurrection. And that is basically the template for all these gods all of ancient times, is the resurrection is through the means of the path, which is already mastered by this avatar, but is given out. And that's the teacher, that's the teaching, and that's this quote unquote sacred elixir, is that doctrine that allows people to return, to come into awareness of their soul and eventually become soul infused, right? So that's what's meant by resurrection, not so much reincarnation.
Francis?
Yeah.
Efrosini says, usually writers like Fraser interpret the myth of death and rebirth naturally, like the seed that dies in the soil in the winter to be reborn in spring. In esotericism, the death and resurrection of God refers to the sacrifice and death, the restriction, of the cosmic and solar logos and the solar angel in order to live the smaller lives.
Beautifully said. And I will be making that same point, is that you really do have two versions that coexist. And one of them is sort of traditional mythology, right? The mythographer's account of traditional mythography. And then you have the esoteric version. And sometimes it's the exoteric gets frustrating in its seeming blindness. And I'll actually explore that to some extent in I guess it's going to be in our next webinar together. But thanks for that observation. I saw Scott's hand up for a minute.
Did you want to say something, Scott? Oh, hold on. He says resurrection of soul and resurrection to the monad for souls so advanced.
Right. And when you're talking about avatars, these are what's termed in Theosophy Nirmanakayas. I think it's originally a Hindu term, which means those who have broken the chains that force them to incarnate, called the chains of samsara, and are free to serve. And so when they incarnate, it's a path chosen by them, but they already have their being in higher realms. And the bodies that they choose are they're called Mayavarupa, which means a body of Maya, right? That they choose to incarnate in, which in itself has certain qualities to it, right? Sometimes they literally reincarnate in a normal human physical body, but there's variations there. But what they do have in common is that they already know the source of their being on higher planes and choose to incarnate. Anybody else? Okay, let's see. So,
Okay,
yeah.
hold on. Brian he says page 79 talked about next to the picture of the hieroglyphical representation of Pan, appears to give a few cardinal points on a chart: Easter, Aries, resurrection, rebirth, and Capricorn tree relates to Capricorn and the hollowed out tree, and buried relates Persephone to the Virgin or Bast, as there are three feminine aspects, and Bast helped to protect the Pharaoh in the land of the dead, rising from fourth house Capricorn, least amount of light to come, be self-aware rebirth, then the new earth seen on the astral plane in Ceres and Anubis greet you, and reborn Horus and Hades is there, but Ceres and Anubis officiate the new birth, as you also acknowledge you were dead anyway. I saw this in a vision, hard to explain.
Well, there's a lot of information there. You could put that. Did you put that in the chat? If people
He
are
did. He put it to everyone.
That's great. That's great. And people can look that over. There were elements of that, that I could respond to. But I think as a whole, it would be just worth people rereading and internalizing, responding to. Okay, and page 79 would be in a different version of this book. This is on page 35 here in the folio edition. And that's what threw me initially. I think we're going to pull the plug because
Janet asked the same question. She says page 79 of what book, because it's not in her Secret Teaching of All Ages.
This has come out in so many versions, and based on the literal physical size of the covers is going to determine the pagination, right? This book that we're going by here. It's the Grand Folio Edition, double folio they call it, and it's so the book is only a couple of hundred pages long, but it represents what would be in a normal book many more hundreds of pages. And that book, we're on page 35, but that's what I use. But there are many editions, and I don't think we can even go by page numbers with this. But we were able to locate it because he said it's next to this illustration by Pan. But that's it for today. We're going to be stepping into the all the different types of elixirs that have come down and what they mean, and it's really a fascinating study in itself. So times for the next webinars?
Okay, the next Secret Teaching of All Ages, this one, is going to be on the 5th of December at 8 p.m. GMT. And then before that, the next Secret Doctrine is going to be on November 21st at 8 p.m.
Good. So we're right on schedule with our first and third Sundays. And then starting in January, we'll be shifting to a new format. Really, it's the same old format with some slight differences. But we'll tell you about that next time in December, because it won't be till January that we do that. We'll give you more details at that time. And I guess that's it. Thanks very much, everyone. I appreciate you all coming today.
Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Fran.